Okay, so welcome to historical writing. This is going to be my cheesy attempt at making a video, but in the hopes of helping you write a better essay and prepare for our first official essay that will be sometime next week. So, what I want to talk about in this short little video is the basic tenets of an intro paragraph, what you should have in an intro paragraph, what the purpose of an intro is, talk a little bit about a thesis and what goes into the body paragraphs. Also, take a look at the do's and don'ts of historical writing. Now, this may be somewhat different than what you've been taught in English class, and that's not to discredit what they say, but this is a writing for a specific purpose, and that is historical writing, particularly in the AP class. So you should, if you haven't done so already, you should pause this and open up a tab and have your draft open from your Google Docs from class. Once you've done that, let's take a look. So intro paragraphs. Before we do, I want to do a shout out to Tom Ritchie, the man who has no idea who I am, but I use a lot of his stuff, and some of this is from him, so I just want to give reference where I need. So writing an intro, what's the purpose of an intro? It really should have three basic elements. It should provide context. This is situating the question of the prompt in time. So often you mention something or allude to something that happened right up or leading up to the essay prompt. So if it's the Revolutionary period, usually we typically look at the French and Indian War or some sort of colonial issue from the colonial time period. But anything that sets right before the prompt. The next thing is you want to kind of list or define any necessary terms that will be important in understanding your answer, if necessary. And then you want to close the paragraph with your thesis. And this thesis should include previews of your main points. Usually you're going to have two or three main points that you're going to argue throughout the essay. So provide context, define any terms that are going to be pertinent to the essay, and then state your claim, your thesis. We'll talk a minute about what that is. The way to look at an intro is it's like a movie trailer. Go YouTube a movie trailer to your favorite movie and take a look at what it does. When you're writing an intro, consider what makes a good movie trailer good. So what it does is it gets your attention, right? It makes the reader want to read more. It kind of pulls you in. Don't get cute with this, but you want to be, talk about the importance of this topic, right? You have an accurate preview, right? And a good trailer gives an accurate preview. It shows you like what's going to happen in the movie, what to expect, what can you expect if you come see this movie, but it doesn't give the whole thing away. You're setting the stage for your essay. You want to save your evidence for the body paragraph. So don't start listing evidence in the intro. You want to give your preview will say, here's what this movie is about for the most part. It's going to tell you what it's about, and it's going to then tell you all the details when you go see the movie. So when you write your essay, save your evidence for the body paragraphs. Okay, so before moving on, let's talk about looking at what a thesis is, what makes a thesis. So a thesis makes an assertion. It's not just a statement or an observation. So take a look at this example. A statement or a fact, right, is more people are attending community colleges. Okay, great, that's a fact, but it's not arguing anything. A more developed thesis would give some explanation as to why more people are attending community colleges. So take a look at this example. So community colleges are attracting more students because they offer job training programs as well as academic courses of study. It's more developed, it's making a case. You now then can go prove that by explaining evidence of job training programs and specific awesome academic courses of study. It explains a little bit more why people are attending community colleges. Another is that it narrows the topic. So a broad topic or a broad statement on what we've been dealing with is something like this. British policies raised tensions in the American colonies. Okay, broadly speaking, that's true. But a thesis will narrow the focus a little bit more and pinpoint some of the causes of this, for example. So a narrowed or focused thesis on this topic would say British policies raised tensions in the American colonies by limiting colonial settlement, threatening colonial profits, and infringing on the rights of colonial freemen. So it gives you three specific reasons that the tensions were getting raised. And by the way, what this also does is it kind of outlines your main points for your body paragraph. Includes a thesis and a main outline. A couple ways you can do this. These are just some sort of general formats. Again, your English teacher might cringe when they see the formulaic way I do this, but a way to look at a thesis could be something like this. One way to do it is, although many historians of blank have argued that blank, closer examination shows that blank. So what this means here is the first blank, although many historians of the Revolutionary period have argued that colonial paranoia of British infringements on their liberties have caused the revolution, closer examination shows that it's a misunderstanding starting with the proclamation line of 1763 and other acts that followed that caused a lot of these tensions, or whatever it is. So, you know, what you're doing here is, although many historians of whatever the topic is have argued other theories, you are then going to say a closer examination shows your theory is correct, right? Another way, which we've done in class a little bit more, is this sort of X, however, A, B, and C, therefore Y formula. And so in this case, the X represents the strongest point against your argument, or an explanation of the complexity of the topic. It sort of addresses all the different various viewpoints on this, or why it's such a complex topic. This acknowledges that you know that this is not a simple solution or a simple answer. It makes you sound more sophisticated. So you're acknowledging the other side. And this could be a sentence or two or three. The however A, B, C, A, B, and C represent the three strongest points of your argument, and then the Y represents the position you'll be taking. In other words, it's your stance on the prompt. All right, so this is a good way to look at these kind of things here. And again, it's a more complex and more sophisticated thing. We'll practice this throughout. Writing an intro, you want to provide some context. You want to define the necessary terms and state your thesis, which includes the preview of your points. And you can look at that example that we looked at in class with the French and Indian War as the context, and then it kind of funnels it in or narrows it into the thesis. I've included this on the Google Classroom, so if you want to look at that, you can take a look at that sample. Okay. So at this point, I'd like you to stop. I'd like you to pause this video, revisit your draft and your intro paragraph. Did you situate the question in time and provide some relative context? Take a look and see if you did that. Did you clearly state your thesis? And did you list your main points somewhere in the intro, which are going to be your outline for your body paragraph? So pause, take a look at your own draft. If you need to take a look at the writing sample, feel free to do that. And then we'll come back. Okay, welcome back. If you didn't pause, go pause and do that. All right, let's look at the body paragraphs. After getting a strong intro, the body paragraphs kind of work themselves out. The order works themselves out. So the first thing it does is each body paragraph should have a specific purpose that is revealed in your topic sentence. This is typically the first sentence of the paragraph. Now, I know you can get kind of creative in your English class, but again, for the sake of writing in the AP history class, your historical point should make it pretty clear. This is an historical essay. Your first couple of sentences should reveal your point. This whole paragraph is about colonial land restrictions, okay? Then everything in that paragraph should serve that purpose of that opening sentence. Explain the land restrictions, why there were land restrictions, you know, Pontiac's Rebellion, the tensions between natives and Americans, if you're doing this topic. And so every piece of evidence, everything in this should serve in proving or elaborating that opening purpose. So you should have focus in each paragraph. Typically, we'll have maybe 3 body paragraphs or so. But not always. And again, the general framework is to have the P method, right? Make your point, give you some evidence and some analysis. And again, if you want to pause and take a look at the writing sample that I put in the classroom or that we looked at in the classroom, you can take a look at the point that was made, which is that kind of first sentence or so, the evidence about Pontiac's Rebellion, the evidence about the proclamation of 1763, and the information about that. And then the last couple of sentences are really the analysis about this, right? And when you're doing the body paragraph, you want to be careful. You don't want to just flub this with tons of evidence, but you do need to know some information about the past in order to do this. You can't write an essay on something you don't know anything about. So while you're going to select the 2 best pieces of evidence per se, 2 or 3 best pieces of evidence, you don't want to just list a bunch of stuff. You do need some evidence to flesh out and illustrate your point. All right. At this point, I'd like you to stop again, pause the video, and go revisit your draft, specifically your body paragraphs. Do each of your paragraphs make a point that is solid and you're focusing? Or are you just listing a bunch of acts, the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, whatever? Take a look at what is the point of your second paragraph, your third paragraph, your fourth paragraph. Is there a overall point to the paragraph? And then how do you illustrate it? Did you put evidence in there? And then how did you analyze this evidence to support your opening point? So again, if you take a look at that second paragraph on the writing sample, it talks about land restrictions the British put on. Right, that's the whole point. The evidence they use is in the middle there. It talks about why there's land restrictions and how the colonial people perceived it. And it's that last part where how the colonial people perceive that evidence is what makes the point. Okay, so pause and take a look. Do you have a body paragraph that has a good point and some evidence to illustrate it? Again, you don't need a massive 5-paragraph essay for this. You really want to shoot for the intro you already have done, hopefully, and then maybe 2 solid body paragraphs. Okay. Take a pause and come back to this when you're done. Okay, moving on. I want to take a quick moment about the conclusion. One, if you're in a timed test, either in class or during the AP exam, and you run out of time, please have the conclusion be an afterthought. It's a good, strong thesis and a good body paragraphs is really what's going to get you the money. The conclusion is a nice icing on the cake. And if you have time, make sure you restate your thesis, quickly review your main points. This is basically the first sentence of each paragraph restated, and then you can kind of allude to the greater purpose of the question or what comes next. So in this case, it would be the outbreak of revolution in your essay. But again, the conclusion, while it's really important, for the sake of the reality of a time test, this is kind of the afterthought. You will not gain or lose a lot of points on this part. Let's take a look. What do you want to avoid? The big red flags that like make AP readers cringe and the other readers of historical writing cringe. One, don't just tell a story. This is an AP class. This is an upper level class in history. You should not look at your essay as telling one big story. Rather, you should look at your essay as a collection of shorter stories that come together to prove a point. In a thesis-driven essay, short stories or evidence should be passengers along for the ride, being used to serve your purpose of proving a point. The story is a means to an end, not the end itself. So don't just say, and this happened in 1763, and then just keep listing evidence. You want to make a series of short little vignettes, short stories that prove your larger point. Don't use personal pronouns. This is pretty straightforward. You want to avoid the use of second person like you or I. You're never addressing the reader directly in formal writing. It works great in certain types of writing, but in formal historical writing, you want to avoid personal. Don't use contradictory language. I often see this in a lot of essays where people say things like, they say, there are too many pros and cons, or it was really good, but it was also really bad. This is too ambivalent. It's great to acknowledge the complexity of the gray areas, how some people thought one way and some people thought the other way, but you really want to avoid this kind of wishy-washy language. Instead, say things like the pros outweighed the cons. You're acknowledging that there were pros and cons, but you're making a clearer stance. The pros outweighed the cons, or in this case, the cons outweighed the pros, whatever you think. Things like it did more harm than good. So you're acknowledging that there was good and there was bad, but you're arguing that the harm was outweighed the good. Okay? Avoid contradictory language. Don't begin paragraphs with evidence. I think most of you did a pretty good job with this, but your evidence should appear in the middle of the paragraph, not in the beginning. Or really in the end. The paragraph should stop with your point, the P thing, right? Topic sentence, after which you present your evidence. You then have your paragraph conclude with the analysis. So again, if you go the P method, you'll be fine with this. So don't start with evidence. Okay, here we go. Don't give the reader your opinion. Defend your thesis, okay? Your thesis is not your opinion. Your thesis is a position you are making after considering lots of evidence. All right, your opinion is like, oh, I believe this, or I think this. In my opinion, the language like this communicates uncertainty and does not project a sense of confidence in your thesis, okay? So it's assumed that you think or believe these things if you're writing them down in a thesis paper. So don't give your opinion in these kind of language. You're defending your thesis, your argument, which is backed by evidence. So don't say, I think or I believe. All right, now, those are what you should avoid. What should you do? Things to always write in the past tense. In an historical essay, you want to avoid situate this essay in the past, keep it in the past. Always use past tense. So you should check and make sure you're always using the past tense. I myself I ease into like telling a play-by-play action where it's like present tense, even if it happened in 1700. So I'm very guilty of this. Make sure you write in the past tense. Always introduce evidence in chronological order. So if you're doing a paragraph on land restrictions and then you're doing a paragraph on overburdening taxation policies, it's okay to go, to do the Proclamation of 1763 to illustrate the land restrictions. But then when you do the taxation restriction policies, make sure when you list the acts that you do it in chronological order that they appear. Otherwise, you get kind of confused and muddled in the causation, the cause and effect. So make sure you keep evidence in chronological order. Always acknowledge the gray areas of history. Stay away from absolutes. Don't say things like all colonists felt this way or never did this happen. You want to make sure that you don't use absolute terms because rarely do you see that in reality or in history. Use appropriate vocabulary. And what I mean by this is, let me read you a couple examples to try to make the point here. So you could say things like the assassination caused the war. But a more complex, sophisticated way to say that would be the assassination provoked the outbreak of war. So it's acknowledging that there may be other factors, but this assassination provoked the start of the war. The diary showed the prejudice versus the diary vividly illustrates the deep prejudice. So you want to you'll work on this throughout the year, but you want to try to come up with more sophisticated and appropriate